This is Carl Moore talking management for the Globe and Mail. Today I'm delighted to speak to Ed Lawler, who's a professor at the Marshall School at USC and the director of the Center for Organizational Effectiveness. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning.
So Ed, you were telling me earlier that you're thinking about a book on Management 3.0. What do you mean by Management 3.0?
Well, fundamentally, that we need to think of a whole new approach to managing complex, large organizations. That we've certainly had the command and control era, which started way back with scientific management and progressed over decades, really, to greater and greater levels of sophistication and expertise that as to how to make it run. That seemed to fit a certain kind of production-driven economy. Clearly, starting in the 1950s, we began to say it has its limits. We have to use our workers differently, our employees differently, and I think that generated Management 2.0, which was around employee involvement and participation and moving more knowledge, information, and power downward in the organization so people could add more value. And I think generally did impact the way most corporations operate. Problem, of course, is we're now in, I think, yet another era. The economy has changed radically since then. The workforce has changed radically since the 60s and 70s, and of course, the economy has changed. It's global. Everybody knows all those points.
Yeah.
So it'd be kind of surprising in many ways if Management 1.0, command and control, or Management 2.0, high involvement or high performance, various names for it, were now suitable. I think we do need a Management 3.0, which recognizes the impact of information technology, different workforces, diversity in the workplace, and so forth. So what I've been trying to do in the new book is say what that looks like. What does it look like? And yes, it incorporates certainly some of the things that we did in Management 1.0 and Management 2.0. I think it really has to have a different philosophy and a different orientation with respect to both organization design, how we treat the workforce, how we think about the workforce, and how we basically lead that kind in this kind of economy and in this kind of competitive environment.
Ed, that's very interesting. I need to know more about 3.0. What is it? Tell us about it so that we can begin thinking about it as managers.
Yeah, well, in many ways to zero in on it, can pick particular areas and how you would do that differently or how you would manage or a general philosophy. Let me just pick one and carry it out. Leadership, for example. Okay. With the movement away from command and control management to high involvement management, we became fascinated with leaders and ascribed a lot of the effects of effectiveness organizations to the behavior of leaders and so forth and so on. And I think that's gone way too far. We've lost a lot of the managerial blocking and tackling that people in supervisory positions have to do in order to make organizations effective. So it seems to me if you're going to have a viable 3.0, it has to include the right blend of leadership behaviors, yes, where you inspire people by a sense of mission, sustainability, accountability, but also have a valid management approach which deals with fundamentals like goal setting and work specification and product evaluation that is produced by employees. So we don't want to lose some of the key managerial skills as we have, I think, in searching for these magical leaders who are going to inspire and direct people.
Okay, so there's a kind of a balance between leadership and management.
Yes.
In these people, that you've got to be a leader, but you also, if you're not a manager at the same time, I think it's kind of, Henry Mintzberg talks about it, it's
yes.
dispiriting.
It is, and I think that's exactly right. It's the balance, and we spend a lot of time training people on leadership, which some people learn and some people don't, but
yeah.
To be frank. And we've lost, I think, a lot of the fundamental manager skills, or never developed them. And we still see managers doing terrible basic management, like performance reviews are done just awfully, and the answer seems to be, well, let's just eliminate them. Well, to me, that's insane. How are you going to direct, control behavior if you don't have some kind of accountability and some sort of reviews that look at people and give them feedback and give them a sense of direction. Just knowing that we're going to be sustainability as a major thrust of the company doesn't translate to day-to-day behavior very easily. You need to be able to make that translation from a sense of vision and mission and so forth to actual behaviors, and that's the managerial part of being an effective manager and leader.
How about how we design organizations? How would that be different under 3.0?
Well, I think it depends substantially, and of course, in what business you're in and how sophisticated the business is and how complex it is. But I see much more self-organizing, much more use of information technology and social networks, and perhaps even internal markets to create the form and allocate financial resources within organizations. And that's an area I think of really enormous differences. In the book that Chris Worley and I did called Built to Change, we emphasized very strongly structures which gave people external interface with the market so that nobody is more than 2 or 3 degrees separate from the external market. I think that's the right emphasis, and we need to build on that kind of thinking, because touching the market and being interfaced with the market helps direct people's behavior internally, give them a sense of how the business is doing, and certainly motivates them to perform well. So I think that piece of the design is critical. What I don't think we did enough with in the Built to Change book is emphasize how organizations can be built out of social networks and how money can be allocated to innovations and startup operations and how they can be converted from ideas to actual operating businesses.
Is that kind of the Wikipediation, the LinkedIn, the Facebookization, if you would, of the world?
I think it is, and that certainly relates to why I think it's viable now and hasn't been in the past. There's a lot of people coming into organizations, partly the younger group, of course, but also more senior people are now much more familiar with those technologies, and it's much more viable to use those technologies to organize. So you're starting to see large companies like the Cisco's and the IBM try to take that technology, which they've sold to consumers, and say, how do we use it internally to create a more adaptable, flexible organization? But one thing we clearly know is that Management 3.0 has to lead for very adaptable, flexible organizations, that yesterday's competitive advantage is rarely to be today's. Yesterday's business model is going to have to be pretty radically changed quickly in order to keep up with the rate of change that exists today in the environment. And if there is a new normal coming out of the recession, I think it is one of change and one of innovation. That companies have to be able to do that, particularly if they're in knowledge work or situations where intellectual property and technology is the key to their business.
A third element might well be corporate governance. What is the impact of how we change corporate governance under Management 3.0?
Yeah, it's an area obviously that needs dramatic revision, and I happen to be in the country, the United States, that probably needs the most dramatic revision. And part of it certainly is creating a corporate board that's more sensitive to social issues and sustainability issues and so forth, which U.S. boards have lagged on mightily. But more than that, I think boards need to develop competencies that they haven't in the past. They've basically been shareholder-oriented, worried about financial results, and not very aware of how those financial results are generated. For example, one of my favorite areas, obviously human capital management, is rarely represented in the competencies of board members. And it became very obvious during the recession, because basically boards were non-players. They didn't know what to do. They knew the costs were there, they knew labor was the most expensive thing in most of their corporations, but they didn't know how to handle that. They hadn't prepared for it, they didn't have employment deals with employees that let them reduce costs sensibly. And in essence, they were non-players. They didn't know who the critical players were, they didn't know what the impact of different alternative methods of cost reduction would be on the workforce and its morale and so forth. I think it really pointed to needing on boards at least 1 or 2 people who have some deep expertise in human capital management. It's the major cost of most corporations today. It's the major source of competitive advantage. And they look at the board, and they're usually CEOs of other companies or finance people, or maybe technology experts if it's a technology. So we have boards that are badly staffed from the challenges in terms of competencies that they need. And we also have boards, of course, in the United States in particular, that are led by the CEO. So the objective oversight of CEO behavior and executive behavior is almost totally absent. That, of course, has led to enormous number of compensation problems for CEOs, level and type and visibility and so forth. That's really hurt the corporate world, I think, in the United States in terms of its how it is viewed by key politicians and the public in general, and that takes a toll on corporations. They look very out of touch with where the American public is, partly because of the way boards have behaved when it comes to executive and management compensation.
You mentioned the idea that the boards have got to take on corporate social responsibility more. Are we moving from a shareholder model, typically more North American, to a stakeholder, more continental European approach?
I think we are. We did a survey about 6 months ago of corporate board members, major corporations, and I was quite surprised actually with the favorable views toward focusing more on sustainability among board members.
Yeah.
If I'd been to a European study, I wouldn't have been surprised.
Yeah.
But American board members, large corporations, were saying with pretty good vigor, it's an important issue. We think it can be a source of competitive advantage for us if we do it better. It can help us profit-wise. It can help us relate to the public. So it's not that it doesn't seem that they are saying it's a good thing to do in the sense of social good. But it's good from a business point of view. And at least with America, as you probably well know, that's the United States. That's the key lever in getting something going from just nice to do, getting it done, and going from nice to do to there's a competitive advantage there is really key. So I think boards are beginning to recognize, the senior managers are beginning to recognize that certain parts of sustainability at least can help the bottom line, help public regulation, avoid things that they don't want to have happen in terms of dictates from Congress and so forth. So it's a definite area where I think we'll see a lot of change in the next 10 years.
This has been Carl Moore talking management for the Globe and Mail. Today I was speaking to Ed Lawler, who's a senior professor at the Marshall School at the University of Southern California.